Indus Valley Civilization, the advanced society that vanished without a trace. The history of human civilization is often told through the stories of gold, grand monuments, and the violent conquests of kings. We look to the pyramids of Giza, rising from the sands as a testament to the absolute power of pharaohs, or to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, where priest kings communed with the divine amidst the noise of bustling city-states. These narratives are familiar to us because they mirror the structures of power and warfare that have dominated recorded history for millennia. But there is another story, one that was buried in the alluvial soil of South Asia for 4,000 years. A story that challenges our assumptions about what it means to be civilized. It is the story of the Indus Valley Civilization, a society that flourished across 1 million square kilometers, built the world's first planned cities, mastered complex metallurgy and hydraulic engineering, and traded with distant lands, all while leaving behind almost no evidence of armies, warfare, or supreme rulers. It is a ghost story of the ancient world, a civilization that achieved a level of sophistication rivaling and in some ways surpassing its contemporaries in Egypt and Sumer, only to dissolve so thoroughly that its very existence was forgotten until the 20th century. To understand the Indus Valley Civilization, or the Harappan civilization as it is scientifically known, we must first strip away the modern borders of Pakistan and India and look at the landscape as it was 5,000 years ago. This was a land dominated by water. The Indus River, a massive, shifting artery of life, flowed down from the Himalayas, fed by glacial melt and monsoon rains. Flanking it to the east was another great river system, the Gagar-Hakra, identified by many hydrologists and archaeologists as the lost Saraswati of Vedic tradition. Between these two great watercourses lay a fertile floodplain that would become the cradle of a unique experiment in human organization. The discovery of this civilization is a tale of missed clues and colonial enterprise. In the 19th century, British engineers building the railway between Lahore and Karachi stumbled upon mounds of ancient baked bricks. To the pragmatic engineers, these were simply a convenient source of high-quality ballast for the train tracks. They dismantled the ruins of Harappa, unaware that they were smashing the remains of a city that had stood when the pyramids were young. It was not until the 1920s that the Archaeological Survey of India, led by John Marshall and featuring the brilliant Indian archaeologists Rakaldas Banerjee and Dayaram Sani, realized that these mounds represented something far older than the Buddhist period they were investigating. When the announcement was made to the world in 1924, it pushed the history of civilization in South Asia back by 2,000 years. Suddenly, India was not just the land of the Vedas, it was the home of a Bronze Age urban culture that was contemporary with the Old Kingdom of Egypt and the early dynastic period of Ur. The scale of the discovery was staggering. As excavations continued over the decades, the map of the Indus Valley Civilization expanded. It was not confined to the banks of the Indus. Settlements were found as far west as Sutkaganda on the Iranian border, as far north as Shortugai in Afghanistan, as far east as Alamgirpur near New Delhi, and as far south as Daimabad in Maharashtra. This vast area, covering roughly 1 million square kilometers, made it the most extensive of the three great riverine civilizations of the ancient world. What distinguishes the Indus Valley Civilization from its peers is not just its size, but its obsession with order, standardization, and civic utility. When we look at a city like Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, we do not see a haphazard collection of houses clustered around a temple. We see a grid. The streets were laid out in cardinal directions, running north-south and east-west, with a precision that implies a central planning authority and a high degree of geometrical knowledge. The main avenues were wide, some up to 10 meters across. designed to accommodate two-way wheeled traffic. Smaller lanes branched off at right angles, creating city blocks that look startlingly modern. This grid system was maintained for centuries. When a house collapsed or was rebuilt, the new walls rose on top of the old ones, adhering to the same property lines. This demonstrates a respect for urban law and a continuity of governance that is rare in the chaotic growth of ancient cities. The buildings themselves were constructed of fired bricks. While the Mesopotamians largely used sun-dried mud bricks, which dissolve easily in rain, the Indus people mastered the kiln. They produced millions of baked bricks, and even more remarkably, these bricks were standardized. Whether in Harappa in the north or Mohenjo-Daro hundreds of kilometers to the south, the bricks followed a precise ratio of 1 to 2 to 4 in terms of thickness, width, and length. This standardization suggests a system of weights and measures that was unified across the entire civilization. It implies a level of economic integration and bureaucratic control that is difficult to fathom without the aid of written records. If the grid system was the skeleton of the Indus cities, water was their blood. The hydraulic engineering of the Harappans was thousands of years ahead of its time. Almost every house in the major cities had a bathing area. The floors of these bathrooms were made of tightly fitted bricks, often waterproofed with bitumen or gypsum. The wastewater from these houses did not flow into the streets to breed disease. Instead, it was channeled through terracotta pipes in the walls, out to the street, and into a complex system of covered drains. These drains were the veins of the city, running beneath the streets, covered with limestone slabs or loose bricks that could be removed for cleaning. At intervals, there were soak pits and sedimentation tanks to separate solid waste from the water, preventing clogs. This focus on sanitation and hygiene is unparalleled in the ancient world. In Europe, such sophisticated sewage systems would not be seen again until the Romans, and in many ways the Indus system was superior because it was accessible to private residences, not just public spaces. The concern for water management extended beyond drainage. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro is perhaps the most iconic structure of the civilization. It is not a palace or a temple, but a watertight tank, 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and 2.5 meters deep. It was constructed with finely fitted bricks, sealed with a thick layer of bitumen natural tar to prevent leakage. Steps led down into the water from two sides. Surrounding the bath were changing rooms and a pillared veranda. Scholars universally agree that this was not a recreational swimming pool, but a place for ritual purification. It suggests a religious ideology that centered on cleanliness and water, a tradition that resonates deeply with later South Asian cultural practices. The mastery of water is seen even more dramatically in the city of Dholavira, located on an island in the Rann of Kutch. Unlike the river valley cities, Dholavira sat in an arid environment where every drop of fresh water was precious. The engineers of Dholavira turned their city into a machine for harvesting water. They built massive stone dams across the seasonal streams that flowed past the city, diverting the flash floods of the monsoon into a series of gigantic reservoirs carved out of solid rock. These reservoirs partially surrounded the city, serving as both a water supply and a defensive moat. The largest of these tanks is a marvel of engineering, showing that the Harappans understood the principles of hydraulic pressure, conservation, and water table management. This adaptability shows that the Indus civilization was not a monolith, but a dynamic society that could tailor its technologies to different environments. But who were the people walking these orderly streets? We know them through their skeletons and their art. Biological anthropology and recent DNA studies, such as the analysis of the woman from the Rocky Gari cemetery, reveal a population with a mixture of ancestries. The primary genetic component was related to ancient Iranian hunter-gatherers, who had separated from the lineage of the Zagros Mountains long before the Neolithic Revolution, mixed with indigenous South Asian hunter-gatherer ancestry. This unique genetic profile suggests that the farming revolution in the Indus Valley was largely an indigenous development, perhaps spurred by early diffusion of ideas, but driven by local adaptation. They were a diverse people. Terracotta figurines show women wearing elaborate headdresses, heavy necklaces of beads, and bangles that covered their arms from wrist to shoulder. The famous bronze statue of the dancing girl from Mohenjo-daro captures a moment of confident naturalism. She stands with her hand on her hip, her head tilted back, wearing nothing but her jewelry. It is a posture of distinct attitude, suggesting a society that valued performance, or perhaps a specific class of artisans. On the other hand, the stone sculpture of the so-called priest king displays a bearded man with a filleted headband and a cloak decorated with a trefoil pattern. His eyes are half closed, as if in meditation. This figure has sparked endless debate. Is he a king? A priest? A clan elder? The lack of royal iconography is one of the most puzzling aspects of the civilization. We find no statues of rulers smiting enemies, no grand stelae boasting of conquests, and no clearly identifiable palaces. The citadels, the raised western sectors of the cities, contain public structures like the Great Bath and granaries, but no residence that unequivocally screams monarch. This has led some archaeologists to propose that the Indus Valley was a heterarchy or a corporate state, ruled by a council of elders, merchants, or religious leaders, rather than a single autocrat. It is a seductive idea, a vast, complex civilization that functioned without the whip of a tyrant. The economy that sustained the society was built on a dual foundation of agriculture and trade. The fertile alluvium of the Indus and Ghaggar-Hakra valleys allowed for the cultivation of wheat and barley during the winter rabi crop, and millets, sesame, and eventually rice during the summer kharif crop. This double cropping system provided a surplus of food that could support large urban populations and specialized craftspeople. They were the first people to cultivate cotton on an industrial scale, weaving fabrics that would become a major export commodity. The animal husbandry was equally impressive. The humped zebu bull was a central motif in their art and a beast of burden in their fields. They kept water buffalo, sheep, goats, and pigs. But it is the trade that truly highlights their global reach. The Indus people were the supreme merchants of the Bronze Age. Their ships with high prows and sterns sailed from the dockyards of Lothal, a coastal city with a massive brick-lined basin that some identify as a tidal dock, to the ports of the Arabian Peninsula and Mesopotamia. In the cuneiform tablets of the Akkadian Empire, we read of ships arriving from Meluhha. Meluhha is widely believed to be the Sumerian name for the Indus Valley. These ships brought ivory, teak, lapis lazuli, gold, and carnelian. The etched carnelian beads of the Indus, drilled with diamond-hard drill bits made of ernestite, were highly prized in the royal courts of Ur and Kish. In return, the Indus people likely imported wool, silver, and other raw materials. This trade network was facilitated by the seals. The Indus seals are small, square steatite tablets, usually about an inch on each side. On them are carved exquisite intaglio images of animals: tigers, elephants, rhinoceroses, and most commonly, a creature that looks like a unicorn, though it may be a bull in profile. Above the animal is a line of script. This script is the holy grail of Indus archaeology. Despite thousands of examples and decades of computer-aided analysis, the Indus script remains undeciphered. We do not know the language it encodes. Is it a Dravidian language, related to Tamil and Telugu? Is it an early form of Indo-Aryan? Is it a language isolate like Sumerian? Or is it, as some controversial theories suggest, Not a linguistic script at all, but a system of non-linguistic symbols like heraldry or highway signs. The brevity of the inscriptions is the main hurdle. The longest inscription is only 26 characters long, found on a signboard at Dolavira that likely hung over a gateway. Without a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual text, we remain locked out of their intellectual world. We cannot read their laws, their myths, or their names. We can only infer their thoughts from the silent objects they left behind. The weights and measures offer a glimpse into their mathematical mind. The cubical stone weights found across the civilization follow a binary decimal system. The lower denominations proceed in a binary series, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on, up to 12,800. The higher weights follow a decimal system. This standardization was rigorous. A weight of 16 units found in a merchant's house in Mohenjo-Daro weighed exactly the same, down to the gram, as a weight found in a workshop in Harappa. This implies a level of metrology and regulation that ensures fair trade and taxation. It suggests that the concept of value was uniform across the vast territory. The technology required to produce these weights, which were often made of chert, involved chipping and polishing the stone to precise geometric shapes, a task requiring immense skill and patience. Craft specialization was taken to an industrial level. In cities like Chanhudaro, we find entire quarters dedicated to bead making. The artisans developed a technology to heat carnelian nodules in distinct stages to deepen their red color, then chipped them into rough shapes, ground them, and finally drilled them with specialized stone drills. The drilling of a single long carnelian bead could take days. These beads were not just jewelry, they were wealth, status, and currency. We also find evidence of shell working, using marine shells to make bangles and ladles. The copper and bronze metallurgy was advanced, using lost wax casting to create intricate figures and tools. However, interestingly, the weaponry of the Indus Valley is notably underwhelming compared to their neighbors. We find arrowheads, spears, and flat axes, but we do not find the swords, maces, and heavy armor that characterize the warrior cultures of the Bronze Age. The fortifications of the cities, with their massive walls and gateways, seem designed more for flood control and controlling the flow of goods than for withstanding prolonged military sieges. There is little evidence of violent destruction in the stratigraphic layers of the cities, at least not until the very end. This has fostered the image of the Indus Valley as a relatively peaceful civilization, one that prioritized commerce over conquest. While this view is likely romanticized, human nature being what it is, the archaeological record does suggest a society where military force was not the primary expression of state power. Religion in the Indus Valley is a subject of interpretation and speculation. We have no temples that we can clearly identify. However, the imagery on the seals and in the terracotta art hints at a rich spiritual life. The most famous seal, the Pashupati seal, shows a figure seated in a yogic posture, surrounded by animals, a rhino, a buffalo, an elephant, and a tiger. The figure has a horned headdress. Many scholars have drawn parallels between this figure and the later Hindu god Shiva in his form as Pashupati, the lord of beasts. We also find numerous terracotta figurines of heavy-hipped women, often interpreted as mother goddesses, suggesting a fertility cult. The worship of trees, particularly the pipal tree, is depicted on several seals. Animals, too, seem to have been totemic or sacred. The unicorn, which appears on the majority of seals, may have represented a dominant clan or a widespread religious symbol. There are also fire altars found in the excavations of Kelibangan and Lothal, distinct from the domestic hearths, suggesting rituals involving fire. The Great Bath itself points to a religion where water and purification played a central role. Burial customs also tell a story. The Harappans buried their dead, usually in a supine position, with heads pointing north. The graves contained pottery and occasionally modest jewelry, but unlike the Egyptians or Sumerians, they did not bury their dead with vast hoards of wealth. This might indicate an ideology that did not believe in taking material riches into the afterlife, or perhaps a society where wealth was inherited rather than removed from circulation. The climax of the Indus Valley story is its disappearance. For centuries, the prevailing theory was one of dramatic, violent collapse. In the mid-20th century, Mortimer Wheeler, a giant of British archaeology, famously accused the Vedic god Indra of destroying the Indus cities. He pointed to a group of skeletons found in the upper layers of Mohenjo-Daro, lying in the streets in contorted positions, as evidence of a massacre by invading Aryan hordes. This was the Aryan invasion theory. Light-skinned, chariot-riding warriors descending from the steppes, destroying the dark-skinned urban dwellers. Today, this theory in its catastrophic form has been largely discarded by the scientific community. The massacre skeletons show signs of having died at different times, and forensic analysis suggests many died of disease, not trauma. Furthermore, there is no archaeological evidence of a burning layer or a distinct layer of Aryan artifacts associated with the destruction of the cities. The transition from the mature Harappan to the late Harappan phase is now understood as a process of deurbanization and transformation, not sudden extinction. The true culprit appears to be climate change. Around 4,200 years ago, a global climatic event known as the 4.2 kiloyear event occurred. It was a period of intense aridification that affected civilizations from Egypt to China. In the Indus context, the monsoon patterns shifted. The summer monsoons, which provided the water for the crops in the hinterlands, became weaker and less reliable. Simultaneously, the great river systems were changing. Tectonic activity in the Himalayas may have shifted the course of the tributaries feeding the Ghaggar-Hakra system. The river, once a mighty torrent, began to dry up or shift its course to join the Ganges or the Indus. As the water receded, the agricultural base that supported the great cities collapsed. The surplus food disappeared. The trade networks reliant on stability and surplus unraveled. The connection with Mesopotamia faded, as the Sumerian city-states also faced turmoil. Without the economic engine of trade and the agricultural abundance to feed the urban masses, the cities became unsustainable. The archaeological record shows a gradual abandonment. The large public structures were encroached upon by private houses. The drains were neglected and clogged. The specific standardization of bricks and weights was lost. The script fell out of use. People began to migrate. They moved east, towards the Gangetic Plain, and south into Gujarat and Maharashtra. They left the cities and returned to smaller, rural village life. The grand urban experiment dissolved into the countryside. This was not the end of the people, but the end of the urban system. The late Harappan phase sees a regionalization of culture. The unified pottery styles broke down into local variations. The distinct stamp seals disappeared. But many technologies and traditions survived. The farming techniques, the bullock carts, the bead making, and likely aspects of the religious iconography persisted. The people who built Mohenjo-Daro did not vanish. They transformed. Their genes are present in the population of South Asia today. Their devotion to the pipal tree, the significance of the swastika symbol, the use of bangles, the emphasis on ritual bathing, all these are echoes of the Indus civilization that continue to resonate in the cultural fabric of the subcontinent. The study of the Indus Valley Civilization is a continuously evolving field. new technologies are opening new windows into the past. Remote sensing and satellite imagery have revealed the dry beds of the ancient rivers, confirming the scale of the hydrological changes. LiDAR scans are helping to identify settlements hidden beneath the dense vegetation or modern agriculture. Residue analysis on pottery is telling us what they ate, identifying the presence of turmeric, ginger, and garlic, showing that the spicy cuisine of South Asia has deep roots. Isotopic analysis of teeth is revealing migration patterns, showing that people in the cities came from different geological regions, proving that these were cosmopolitan hubs. And, of course, the DNA revolution is just beginning. As we recover more genetic data from the skeletal remains, we will better understand the complex web of ancestry that made up the Harappan population. We are learning that the dichotomy between Aryan and Dravidian is a vast oversimplification of a much more fluid prehistoric reality. We must also consider the political organization again in light of the, quote, invisible state. The lack of palaces has led to the use of game theory and complex system theory to understand how they managed such a vast area. Some scholars suggest a system of guilds or corporate bodies that controlled trade and maintained order through economic interdependence rather than military coercion. If this is true, the Indus Valley Civilization offers a unique model in human history, a successful, long-lasting, complex society that thrived on cooperation and trade rather than dominance. It challenges the Hobbesian view that life without a strong central sovereign is nasty, brutish, and short. Here was a life that was orderly, sanitary, and rich, maintained for 700 years without the glorification of violence. The mystery of the script remains the final frontier. Artificial intelligence and machine learning models are currently being trained on the corpus of Indus signs to look for patterns that the human eye might miss. They are analyzing the conditional entropy of the symbols to determine if the structure resembles a linguistic syntax or a non-linguistic symbol system. While no breakthrough has occurred yet, the mathematical probability points towards it being a logosyllabic script, similar in function to Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mayan glyphs, where one symbol can represent a word, a sound, or a concept. The brevity of the texts is the problem. It is like trying to reconstruct the English language by only reading license plates and stamps. We lack the literature, the letters, the decrees. We only have the labels. But even these labels tell us of a society obsessed with identity and ownership. The legacy of the Indus Valley Civilization is also a story of technological transmission. The knowledge of metallurgy, particularly the production of bronze and the working of gold, did not disappear. It laid the groundwork for the second urbanization of India that would occur 1,000 years later in the Ganges Valley. The standard of weights may have influenced the coinage systems of the historic period. The layout of the cities, with their orientation to the cardinal directions, appears in the Vastu Shastra, the ancient Indian canon of architecture. Even the yoga-like figures on the seals suggest that the physical and spiritual disciplines that characterize South Asian religion may have their roots in this era. The continuity is subtle but pervasive. It is a civilization that did not die but went underground, sublimating into the cultural DNA of the region. As we walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro today, seeing the shadows of the walls stretch across the dusty streets, we are struck by the silence. It is a heavy silence, filled with the ghosts of merchants, artisans, mothers, and priests. We see the well that still holds water after 4,000 years. We see the brick paving where children once played. We see the drain that carried away the waste of a bustling metropolis. We realize that the problems they faced, climate change, water management, the need for urban planning, are the same problems we face today. They were not primitive. In many ways, they were us. They built a world of order and prosperity, and then the world changed around them. Their rivers dried, their rains failed, and their meticulously planned grid could not save them from the shifting environment. They adapted by dispersing, by simplifying, by surviving in smaller units. The story of the Indus Valley is also a corrective to the Western-centric view of history. For a long time, the narrative of civilization was focused on Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Fertile Crescent. The Indus was seen as a peripheral development. We now know it was a core. It was likely the most populous of the ancient civilizations. It was a hub of innovation that exported ideas and goods to the West. The beads from the Indus have been found in the royal tombs of Ur, but Mesopotamian goods are rarely found in the Indus, suggesting a trade imbalance where the Indus was the supplier of finished luxury goods. They were the workshop of the ancient world. Their cotton textiles clothed the elite of distant lands. Their carnelian adorned the necks of Sumerian queens. One of the most fascinating recent excavations is that of Sinauli, located in the distinct region of the upper Ganges-Yamuna Doab. While the dating and cultural affiliation are debated, with some linking it to a late phase of the Harappan tradition or a contemporary warrior culture, the findings of chariots and copper-hoard weaponry challenge the, quote, peaceful narrative. It suggests that as the urban centers declined, a more martial culture may have emerged or moved in. This interplay between the urban Harappans and the rural or nomadic groups around them is a dynamic area of research. It suggests that the quote, vanishing was actually a blending. The rigid order of the cities gave way to a more fluid, perhaps more violent, but also more resilient rural culture that would eventually evolve into the society described in the Vedas. The environmental lessons of the Indus Valley are particularly poignant for the modern world. They flourished during a period of optimal climate known as the Holocene climatic optimum. When this stable period ended, their highly specialized urban system became vulnerable. Their reliance on the monsoons and the river systems made them susceptible to hydrological drought. The collapse was a slow-motion disaster, unfolding over 2 or 3 centuries. It serves as a warning about the fragility of complex societies in the face of environmental shifts. We often think of our own civilization as invincible, insulated by technology. The Harappans likely felt the same. They had mastered the river, they had mastered the clay, they had mastered the trade routes. Yet, when the rain stopped falling and the river changed its course, their mastery could not sustain the megacities. We must also talk about the Meluha villages in Mesopotamia. Cuneiform texts refer to a village of Meluhans in the territory of Lagash. This implies a diaspora. Indus merchants living abroad, maintaining their identity, perhaps acting as trade agents. It brings a human dimension to the trade. Expatriates living in a foreign land, translating between cultures. Did they eventually assimilate? Did they return home when the news came that the cities were failing? We can only imagine the conversations in the port cities of Sumer, as the ships from the east became fewer and farther between. The art of the Indus, though miniature, reveals a keen observation of nature. The animals on the seals are not stylized caricatures, but anatomical studies. The dewlap of the bull, the gait of the elephant, the ferocity of the tiger, these are rendered with an artist's eye. This love for the natural world is also seen in the painted pottery, decorated with motifs of peacocks, fish, and leaves. It reflects a society that saw itself as embedded in the natural world, not separate from it. The resources they used, shell, stone, clay, metal, were drawn from a vast catchment area, indicating a deep knowledge of the geology and biology of their subcontinent. In the end, the Indus Valley Civilization remains a mirror. We look into it and see reflections of our own urban aspirations. We see the desire for order, for cleanliness, for prosperity. We also see the limits of human endeavor. The bricks of Harappa were robbed to build a railway, a symbol of the industrial age cannibalizing the Bronze Age. But the knowledge of the Harappans was not lost. It seeped into the soil, into the traditions, into the very genetic makeup of the people who still live along the banks of the Indus and the Ghaggar. The advanced society did not vanish without a trace. It vanished into the people. It became the foundation upon which the complex, chaotic, and vibrant history of South Asia was built. The grid may be gone, but the culture that created it endures in 1,000 subtle ways, waiting for us to recognize the threads that connect the weaver in a modern Pakistani village to the bead maker in ancient Chanhudaro, or the farmer in Haryana to the cultivator who first yoked a zebu bull 5,000 years ago. The silence of the ruins is not an emptiness. It is a pause in a conversation that has been going on for 5 millennia. To truly grasp the magnitude of the Indus Valley Civilization, we must zoom in from the satellite view of its sprawling grid cities and descend into the microscopic details of the workshops, the laboratories, and the private lives of its people. For it is in the minutiae of their daily existence and their technological mastery that the true genius of this society is revealed. While the absence of monumental palaces and temples initially confounded archaeologists, leading them to search for a missing king, the real monuments of the Indus people were their technologies, their standardized crafts, and their intricate control over materials, which display a level of scientific application that was practically industrial in its scope and ambition. This was a society where the standardization of a bead, or the precise ratio of a weight, was accorded the same importance that other civilizations gave to the construction of a royal tomb, suggesting a value system deeply rooted in commerce, precision, and perhaps a form of technocratic governance that we are only just beginning to understand. One of the most spectacular examples of this technical supremacy is found in the production of long carnelian beads, a commodity that was arguably the most prestigious luxury good of the 3rd millennium BCE. These were not simple trinkets strung together by village artisans, but the product of a highly specialized, state-controlled industry that utilized pyrotechnology and lithic engineering of the highest order. Excavations at cities like Chanhudaro and Lothal have uncovered the factories where these beads were made, revealing a process that was complex, risky, and incredibly time-consuming. The raw material, carnelian, is a reddish-orange variety of chalcedony that was sourced from the Ratanpur mines in what is now Gujarat. The Harappan craftsmen understood that the deep, blood-red color prized by elites was not always natural, so they developed a complex heat treatment process. The raw nodules were placed in potsherds and fired in kilns to remove moisture and oxidize the iron content in the stone, intensifying the color from a dull brown to a vibrant red. This firing had to be carefully controlled. Too much heat would shatter the stone, too little would leave it dull. Once the color was achieved, the stone was chipped into rough cylinders using hammers made of copper and horn, a process that required immense dexterity to avoid fracturing the brittle material. The true marvel, however, lay in the drilling. The Harappans produced carnelian beads that were sometimes 10 to 12 centimeters long, slender, and perfectly cylindrical, requiring a hole to be drilled through the entire length of the hard stone without breaking it. To achieve this, they invented a drill bit made of a distinct material known as ernestite, a highly indurated metamorphic rock that was harder than the carnelian itself. These specialized drill bits were constricted to create a tiny cupped tip that could bite into the stone. The drilling process for a single long bead is estimated to have taken 2 to 3 weeks of continuous labor by a skilled artisan. They used a bow drill, possibly water-cooled to prevent overheating, and drilled from both ends, meeting in the middle with a precision that is mind-boggling. If the two channels did not align perfectly, the bead would snap, and weeks of work would be wasted. The fact that thousands of these beads have been found, not only in the Indus cities, but in the royal cemetery of in Mesopotamia, indicates that the Harappans were mass-producing these high-risk items for export. This suggests an economy with the capacity to support specialized laborers who did nothing but drill holes in stone for their entire lives, supported by a surplus of food and a guaranteed market for their goods. It implies a credit system, a merchant class capable of long-distance networking, and a manufacturing sector that operated with the discipline of a modern factory. Beyond the stone, the Harappans were masters of synthetic materials, most notably faience. While faience was known in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus artisans developed a distinct silica-rich variety that was stronger and more compact. They created a paste from crushed quartz, colored it with copper oxide to create a turquoise blue, and fired it in specialized kilns that allowed for the circulation of oxygen to ensure a vibrant color. This material was used to make beads, bangles, and small vessels, but also for intricate animal figurines and even seal impressions. The chemistry involved in controlling the flux and the temperature to produce high-quality faience is significant. It shows an experimental approach to materials science, where artisans were constantly tweaking mixtures to achieve specific physical properties. This is further evidenced in their metallurgy. The bronze produced in the Indus Valley was a true alloy, usually containing about 10 to 12% tin mixed with copper. This ratio is optimal for hardness and casting capability. Since tin is not found locally in the alluvial plains, it had to be imported from distant sources, possibly from Afghanistan or Central Asia, highlighting the extensive supply chains that fed the Indus workshops. They used the lost wax casting technique, or serru perdue, to create complex bronze figures. The famous dancing girl is a prime example of this. The figure is solid bronze, cast in a single piece. The detailing of her fingers, the necklace, and the hair indicates that the wax model was sculpted with great finesse, before being encased in clay and melted out. This technique requires not just artistic skill, but a sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics and fluid mechanics to ensure the molten metal fills the mold completely without cooling prematurely. The industrial nature of the civilization extends to the processing of shell. The coastal settlements like Nageshwar and Balakot were essentially factory towns dedicated to the harvest and processing of the Turbinella, a massive marine conch. These shells were extremely hard and difficult to work, yet the Harappans developed a specific bronze saw with a curved blade to cut the shells efficiently. They produced distinct styles of bangles, ladles, and inlay pieces that were shipped inland to the great cities. The shell bangles in particular seem to have held deep cultural significance. In burial sites, we often find women wearing shell bangles on their left arms, sometimes in specific numbers, suggesting that these were not just jewelry but markers of identity, perhaps signifying marital status or clan affiliation, a tradition that mirrors the wearing of chuda bangles by brides in Western India today. The standardization of these shell-cutting techniques across the vast territory implies a transfer of knowledge that was likely formalized, perhaps through a guild system or apprenticeship programs that ensured the Harappan way of doing things was preserved from the coast of the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Himalayas. While the manufacturing prowess of the Harappans is evident in their portable art, Their engineering genius is most visibly fossilized in the layout and hydraulic systems of the city of Dolavira. Unlike the flat alluvial plains of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, Dolavira was situated on the rocky island of Kadir Bet in the Rann of Kutch. The environment here was harsh, prone to droughts, and lacked the perennial water source of a giant river. To survive, the engineers of Dolavira had to terraform the landscape. They took advantage of the slope of the land and the two seasonal rivulets, the Manhar and the Mansar, that flanked the settlement. They constructed a series of check dams to slow the flash floods of the monsoon and divert the water into a complex network of reservoirs. These were not simple ponds. They were massive, stone-lined tanks, some cut directly into the bedrock. The largest series of reservoirs on the eastern side of the city interconnected, allowing water to settle and purify as it moved from one tank to the next. The scale is immense. The eastern reservoir alone is nearly 3 times the length of an Olympic swimming pool. The walls were lined with masonry and sealed to prevent seepage. This system was designed to capture every drop of rain that fell within the catchment area. Calculations suggest that the reservoirs could hold enough water to sustain a population of 15,000 to 20,000 people for an entire year of drought. This is strategic survival engineering. The citadel of Dolavira is also distinct. It is a nested fortification, a castle within a castle. The bailey and the castle districts are raised on massive artificial platforms, and the walls are built of stone blocks, unlike the brick walls of the river cities. The precision of the stone masonry is stunning. The stones were cut and dressed to fit tightly, and some of the polished pillar elements found in the gateways are so smooth, they feel like modern concrete. These pillared halls and gateways suggest a ceremonial aspect to the city's architecture. It was at the north gate of the Dolavira citadel that the famous signboard was found. This consists of 10 massive symbols, each about 37 centimeters high, made of pieces of white gypsum paste that were set into a wooden board. The wood has long since rotted away, but the arrangement of the letters remained in the dirt. This was likely a large billboard visible from a distance, proclaiming the name of the citadel, the city, or the ruler. It is the closest thing we have to monumental signage in the Indus Valley. The existence of such a sign implies a literate public, or at least a public that recognized the authority embedded in the script. It transforms the city from a collection of houses into a civic entity with a labeled identity. The script itself remains the intellectual black hole of Indus studies, pulling in careers and theories and yielding no light. However, looking closely at the structure of the script reveals fascinating details about the Harappan mind. There are about 400 distinct signs, though many may be ligatures or combinations of simpler signs. The direction of writing is almost certainly from right to left. We know this because in some inscriptions, the writer ran out of space on the left side and had to cram the final characters together or drop them to a second line. This human error fossilized in ceramic is the smoking gun for the directionality. The script is found on everything: seals, pottery shards, copper tablets, bronze tools, and even ivory rods. This ubiquity suggests that literacy, or at least the use of symbols for identification, was not restricted to a tiny priestly elite, but was used in commerce and administration. The most common inscriptions are on the steatite stamp seals. These seals usually carry a single line of text and an animal motif. The text is believed to be a name or a title. Statistical analysis of the sign sequences has shown that the script has a rigorous syntax. Certain signs only appear at the beginning of sequences, others only at the end. There are core signs and modifying signs. This non-random structure proves it is a full linguistic writing system, not just a collection of clan symbols or astronomical markers. The barcode theory, which suggests the signs were just accounting tokens, falls apart when we see the complexity of the sign combinations. The language underlying it is most likely a Proto-Dravidian tongue, based on the survival of Dravidian loanwords in the Vedas and the presence of the Brahui language, a Dravidian outlier, in Balochistan today. However, without a bilingual text, this remains a hypothesis. One of the most enigmatic elements of the seals is the so-called unicorn. This creature, which looks like a bull with a single long, curved horn emanating from the back of its head, is the most common motif, appearing on over 60% of all seals. For years, scholars debated if this was a mythical animal or a clumsy depiction of a bull in profile. However, two-horned bulls are also depicted on other seals with both horns clearly visible, and the unicorn is consistently shown with a strange object placed in front of it. A stand with a bull-like top, often called the sacred filter or standard. The consistency of this imagery, the unicorn and the standard, suggests it was the emblem of the dominant political or social group in the Indus Valley. It might represent the ruling clan, a specific guild of merchants, or a widespread religious cult that unified the disparate cities. The fact that unicorn seals are found in almost every settlement, large or small, implies that the authority or identity it represented was universal across the civilization. In contrast, other animals like the elephant, tiger, and rhino are rarer and might have represented specific regions or rival clans. The disappearance of the unicorn motif coincides exactly with the collapse of the urban phase, suggesting that whatever political or religious structure held the civilization together was dismantled, taking its primary symbol with it. Digging deeper into the domestic life, the bioarchaeological evidence gives us a visceral picture of the health and diet of the Indus people. We are not just looking at pots, we are looking at the residue inside them. Analysis of ceramic vessels has revealed traces of turmeric, ginger, garlic, and eggplant. This is the earliest evidence of the fundamental ingredients of South Asian cuisine. They were making proto-curries 4,500 years ago. They also consumed dairy on a large scale. Lipid residues from pottery indicate the processing of milk into yogurt, cheese, or ghee. The meat diet included beef, mutton, and freshwater fish, but also game animals like deer and wild boar, showing a diet that mixed agriculture with hunting. The domestication of the chicken is another Harappan contribution to the world. Genetic studies suggest the red jungle fowl was domesticated in this region, initially perhaps for cockfighting, a sport depicted in clay figurines before becoming a food source. The skeletons themselves tell a story of a hardworking, relatively healthy, but disease-prone population. At the cemetery of Farmana in Haryana, and in the excavation at Harappa, we find evidence of dentistry. Teeth show drilling marks consistent with the treatment of cavities, a painful but sophisticated medical intervention. We also see healed fractures, indicating that people survived serious injuries and were cared for by their community. However, there is also evidence of infectious diseases. Some skeletons show lesions consistent with leprosy and tuberculosis, marking some of the earliest known cases of these diseases in human history. The urbanization of the Indus Valley, with its dense populations and waterborne waste, created the ideal breeding ground for pathogens. Despite their advanced drainage, the sheer density of living, cities like Mohenjo-Daro had tens of thousands of people packed into a relatively small footprint, meant that hygiene was a constant battle. The high number of amulets and ritual objects found in houses might have been a spiritual response to the invisible threat of disease. The social structure remains one of the most debated specifics because of what is missing. The heterarchy theory deserves more detailed exploration. In most Bronze Age societies, power was vertical. King at the top, peasants at the bottom. The architecture reflects this, with palaces dwarfing huts. In the Indus cities, the difference between the largest house and the smallest house is not exponential. There are large courtyard houses, certainly, which likely belonged to wealthy merchants or clan leaders. But there is no Versailles. This has led scholars to propose that the Indus civilization was a corporate society, organized horizontally. Power might have been shared between different groups, perhaps a council representing the bead makers, the grain merchants, the landowners, and the priests. The city was divided into neighborhoods that might have been occupational districts. In Harappa, we find distinct areas for metalworking and pottery. If these guilds were powerful, they might have checked the power of any single individual aspiring to kingship. This guild state model explains the standardization of goods. Guilds are obsessed with standards and quality control. It also explains the emphasis on trade. A merchant republic is more likely to prioritize standardized weights and peaceful trade routes than a warrior aristocracy obsessed with glory and conquest. However, the peaceful realm theory is being challenged by new findings at sites like Sanauli, located about 60 kilometers from Delhi. Although Sanauli is often categorized as late Harappan or ochre-colored pottery (OCP) culture, its proximity in time and space forces a re-evaluation of the region's martial history. The discovery of full-size chariots, copper swords with reinforced midribs, and helmets at Sanauli suggests that a warrior class did exist in the orbit of the Indus civilization. These were not the clumsy carts of the Harappan merchants, but vehicles of war. The individuals buried there were interred with weapons, a practice rare in the mature Indus cities. This raises the possibility that the, quote, peaceful Indus cities were an anomaly. Islands of commercial stability surrounded by more volatile, militarized tribal groups. Or, perhaps, as the central authority of the cities waned, the monopoly on violence collapsed, giving rise to warlords and the weaponization of copper technology. The copper hordes found in the Doab region, consisting of strange anthropomorphic figures and heavy harpoons, might represent the armaments of these post-urban warrior groups who filled the power vacuum left by the decline of the Harappan oligarchs. The global footprint of the Indus Valley is best seen through the eyes of the Mesopotamians. In the cuneiform tablets, Meluhha is a distant, exotic land of riches. We know they had a direct presence there. A cylinder seal found in Mesopotamia belonged to a translator of the Meluhhan language, showing that the language barrier was being actively managed. There were Meluhhan villages in the Sumerian territory, likely trade diasporas similar to Chinatowns or Little Italies. These expats would have brought their customs with them. We can imagine Indus merchants celebrating their own festivals in the shadow of the ziggurat of Ur, using their own weights to measure the gold they sold for wool. The decline of the trade with Meluhha is recorded in the tablets. First, the direct ships stop arriving. Then, the goods only come through middlemen in Dilmun, Bahrain, or Magan, Oman. Finally, the name Meluhha ceases to refer to a specific place and becomes a term for a mythical, lost land, or is oddly reassigned to describe places in Africa. This textual fading mirrors the archaeological decline on the ground. As the Indus cities de-urbanized, they lost the capacity to build the great ships and finance the long-distance expeditions. The globalized world of the Bronze Age fragmented into local, autarkic regions. Another fascinating specific detail is the Harappan system of gaming. We find cubic dice made of terracotta and stone that are practically identical to modern dice, with one opposite 6, two opposite 5, and so on. We also find stick dice and flat game boards etched into the floors of houses and public buildings. In Mohenjo-Daro, track-like games are carved into bricks, suggesting that people played board games in the streets or courtyards. This speaks to a concept of leisure time. A society that plays complex board games is a society that has solved the immediate problem of survival. It implies a culture that values strategy and chance. Some scholars have linked these games to the later Indian game of Pachisi, Chaupar, suggesting a continuity of recreational culture that spans millennia. The toys found are equally telling. We find terracotta carts with movable wheels, whistles shaped like birds, and bowls with nodding heads attached by strings. These were not ritual objects but playthings for children. They show a society that invested in the amusement and education of its young. The movable parts indicate a mechanical mindfulness. Children were playing with machines, internalizing the concept of axles and rotation from an early age. The astronomical orientation of the cities is another layer of their scientific depth. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are oriented to the cardinal directions with a deviation of only 1 or 2 degrees. This required precise astronomical observation. The Holocene climatic optimum meant that the sky was different then. The position of the pole star was not Polaris, but Thuban, Alpha Draconis. The Harappan architects likely used the motion of the stars or the shadow of the sun to lay out their grids. In Dholavira, circular structures have been interpreted by some archaeoastronomers as solar observatories, used to track the solstices and equinoxes, which was crucial for a society dependent on the timing of the monsoon for agriculture. The regulation of the calendar was a source of power. Knowing when to plant and when to sail was knowledge that could mean life or death. The priests or elders who held this knowledge would have commanded immense respect. Finally, we must consider the end, not as a single event, but as a cascade of specific failures. The 4.2 kiloyear event brought a mega drought. Specific studies of the sediments in the Kotla Dahar Lake in Haryana show a dramatic weakening of the monsoon isotope signature exactly at this time. But it wasn't just rain. The Saraswati-Gagar-Hakra river system was rain-fed but also had Sutlej and Yamuna connections in the past. Tectonic shifts likely diverted the Sutlej into the Indus and the Yamuna into the Ganges, leaving the Gagar-Hakra as a rain-fed remnant that dried up when the monsoons failed. The cities on its banks, like Kalibangan and Banawali, were abandoned first. The population didn't just die, they moved. We see a massive increase in the number of settlements in the upper Ganges Valley and in Gujarat during the late Harappan period. They downsized, they switched crops. They abandoned wheat and barley, which need winter rain, for drought-resistant millets and summer rice. This agricultural shift changed their society. Millets don't produce the same massive surplus as wheat. You can't build a megacity on millet in the Bronze Age. So the cities shrank to towns, the towns to villages. The script, used for trade and taxation, became useless in a village economy and was forgotten. The weights were no longer needed when you were just bartering with your neighbor. The complex plumbing was impossible to maintain without a municipal authority. The civilization wasn't murdered. It was forced to downshift by the planet itself. The sophisticated urban industrial Harappan became the rural agricultural villager, carrying the memories of the great cities and myths and rituals that would eventually blend with the incoming cultures to form the matrix of Indian civilization. The vanished civilization is actually the bedrock of the living culture of South Asia, present in the way a bangle is worn, a curry is spiced, a die is cast, and a morning bath is taken.